I just want to make sure that everybody's had a chance to sign in. There's 2 sign-up sheets back there. We keep track of everybody that was here. And there's plenty of agendas back there too. I wouldn't be surprised if we have some folks who come in after we get started. Boy, we don't really think we'll go much longer than 2 hours. Hopefully nobody can stay that long. But if you have to leave, that's okay. We'll be documenting everything in the meeting and sending out notes. And everybody here is a member of the advisory council. If you're not, that's okay. We're going to open this up to the public as well. So anybody who's interested is certainly invited to come to these meetings. My name is Kevin Efferly. I'm an architect. I'm leading this team. I'm with the firm FEH Associates. This is Don Seymour, also with FEH, an architect. He's the project manager on the team. And Ray Greco is a courts expert, and he is from Minneapolis. I'm from Dubuque, Don's from Des Moines. So we've all come together here to work with you. And we've got members of our team from 2 other locations, several other locations actually too. Other folks on our team, another architect, Greg Baum. He is in Delafield, Wisconsin. Our historic preservation architect, in addition to me, is Ed Storm. He's in FEH's Sioux City office. He's not here tonight. But he definitely will be involved. We have mechanical, electrical engineers from KCL Engineering, James Deeds and Mark LaCroix, and they have done assessment work on the courthouse. We also have a structural engineer with FEH. Carl will be involved in some of these meetings, but mostly it was the assessment. Depending on how we move forward, he'll be involved. And the civil engineer, Yagi Colby, is also involved in the project. So we've got a pretty good sized team. You'll see all of us through the process because we are pretty hands-on once we get into looking at solutions and options.
Well, the one thing I'd like to add at this point, Kevin, is that you'll see us all the way through. Kevin and I will be here all the way through to the end of the project. So if you have any questions, just feel free to ask us at any time.
Also a decision-making group. This group is going to make recommendations through us in the form of a formal report that we will put together at the end of the process, probably late March, mid to late March. First thing that we want to go over with you tonight is the goals for success of this project and the process. So these are the 9 points that we've identified that we want to work through. And these were identified back in August to come up with the best solution for the project and the process. The first one is to provide a county courthouse facility that creates a safe and secure operation. And as we go through these, if anybody feels that that goal doesn't make sense, raise your hand and we can talk about that. The second one is to provide adequate space for a functional operation. The third one is to provide an attractive facility that represents the county culture, a building that needs to be visible and identifiable as a county courthouse and promote civic pride. The fourth point is the facility needs to be flexible and adaptable for future change and or expansions. As you can see, these are fairly generic, but these are the things that we want to be able to achieve. Develop a sustainable facility for ongoing use in terms of the environment, the culture, and the cost of operation. The sustainability in this case is, you hear a lot of people talk about green design or green products. Green is the environmental aspect of sustainability. True sustainability is a 3-legged stool. Financial sustainability costs more to operate. That just does not make sense. It's not sustainable. And for it to be sustainable for your county, it needs to represent your culture and support the culture of how things work here in Mitchell County. Choose and develop a site that embraces the environment and culture. That may very well be the site that it's on or the building that it's in. Create a 100-year building, whether that's an addition, remodel, or a new building. Locate the facility to provide access for all and best serve all residents of Mitchell County. Develop a facility that will promote and leverage economic development. We got 2 more here, I think. Provide a county courthouse that encourages citizens to participate in their government. And develop a facility solution that is fundable and justifiable to the taxpayers. Those are the goals that we're going to rely upon during decision making. Whenever we go through a project, we identify these goals. And we use them for all of our team members. The next thing I want to talk about is the scope of this project. To conduct a space needs assessment, to evaluate with the things that are going to be happening in this building, how big and what types of spaces do we need in the building. The facility condition assessment, taking a look at 3 simple things: maintenance needs, code items, and ADA items. So we look at the building and we say, there are code violations, there are things that need to be repaired, there are maintenance ongoing things, and identifying what those are. Public planning facilitation, basically facilitating this process, getting as much public input as we can, and gathering that in an unbiased way and helping us to make decisions so that we end up with a solution that fits with what is desired in the community and supports what everybody wants. The conceptual design workshops, which we'll talk about, those are on-site workshops where we bring our design teams here and we will start to study all the possibilities of what the building may be, from renovations to who knows what. And then public presentations, of course, making presentations on the process and the outcome of that process. And of course, we're counting on the advisory committee to be as involved as possible in helping us to guide that process. So that's the scope of what we're here to do. The phase 2 piece is not defined yet, but it will probably include any types of studies that may be required as a result of the phase 1. And then the phase 3 piece is essentially going through design and construction administration and what the outcome of those first 2 phases would be. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to review the space needs assessment as we've gotten through it so far. It's a draft. We've conducted interviews. And of course, Ray is very focused on the court side. Don's interviews are more focused on the office side of the courthouse.
How much does phase 1, what kind of budget do you have for phase 1?
Phase 1 is, that's a good question, reimbursables, site evaluation. If you add it all together, it's in the range of $60,000 to $70,000.
That would include all the time for the workshops and the review of the facility condition. So that's all included in that first. So one of the things we did, we went through and tried to talk to individuals in each of the departments, and then we collected those comments and sent them back, and we have this report. We're trying to say is, this is how much space you've told us you need. And so the next part of this, as I said earlier, we're going to come back and we're going to flush this out and say, okay, we talked about this, is there anything else that you need in these areas? And then when we get into our workshops, when we start putting all these different spaces together, we might find that there are some things that can double up. So for instance, if every department said, well, I need a small conference room, what we might find is that a common conference room works better, that is better suited to move out of that department, but be a common area. So does anybody have any questions about how we got to some of these numbers? Yeah.
The space needs that you're assuming that all of the departments that were in the courthouse will be there in the future.
We did talk about some of that. There are some now that are not in the courthouse, but there's still valuable services that have to be provided. And some of those we're bringing back in. So some of the off-site stuff, like you have off-site storage, I believe it's the health department is got storage off-site. So we've got all of those factored in. And so we'll take a look at that. Some of that storage might end up being in like in a basement area for common storage, just subdivided.
I think it's important to point out that we identified space needs for all the county offices, but that doesn't mean they're all going to go in one building. They might go in 4 different buildings.
That's what I mean. If the departments that have been in the courthouse, some of them don't necessarily need to be in a courthouse. So I was just wondering if your space need assessment was for everything that's in there.
And you heard my comment.
Pardon
That
me?
doesn't necessarily mean all these facilities will be in the same building.
Yeah.
It might be in 3, 4,
Right.
2, 1.
Thank
We
you.
haven't determined that. What we know is this is the amount of space we need for those departments.
Existing buildings a little over 15,000 square foot of usable space. And we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of just under 40,000. Okay? And that's addressing all the things that we've heard so far.
Just because we came up with these space needs doesn't mean we're going to build a 40,000 square foot building somewhere. These are the total spaces that are needed in the county for these departments. That's the information that we're providing you today. We will eventually develop what budgets might be for different scenarios of how the county accommodates that space.
Building budget is to know what spaces are going to go in. And so we have to go through all that space needs first, because it turns out that we flush all this out with your help that says, you know what, we really only need about 25,000 square feet based upon the needs that we figure out. Then that budget changes. The worst thing you can do is say, well, we're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink in, and here's our budget, and all of a sudden we get rid of the things you don't really need or you don't really want. Or we find consolidated spaces, and then it's a different number, and then you confuse people about, well, I thought it was this before, and I thought it was this. So before we even get to a building budget, we want to make sure all this programming information is correct. So that's why we don't want to put that number to it just yet.
Do you want to go through these spaces, Rick?
Yeah, I can start. I'm not going to go through all these spaces, but I'll touch on a few of them. In today's modern day courthouses, you have 3 separate circulation systems. One for the judges, one for public, and one for defendants. And they never cross. They all meet at the courtroom. And that, not only is there a security problem, but you could compromise court proceedings if they're meeting in the court. And but in any case, we went through and used the National Center for State Courts, their guidelines. The state of Iowa uses that. So we started with their minimum requirements for the spaces. And we'll have to fill this in for the next meeting. It'd be nice to know what you have right now versus what's being proposed. But the district courtroom is, right now, it does not function. In terms of the chambers, we went through and determined what the needs were, and there's visiting judges, and we got it down to a bare, kind of a minimum.
Ray, the other thing that you did, we talked to Scott Hand.
Yeah. Oh no, we spent a lot of time.
If you want to share with these guys who Scott is and what his role is.
Scott is the court administrator for the people here know Scott. You do good. But he's the court administrator for this district, and he knows what's going on in other court facilities within the area, and he pretty much he endorsed this 100%, and he's the one that really felt that.
We've already brought him in early on. Yes, sir.
I just have a question with this, the way you're talking. It appears that, does this committee have the option of knocking any of that stuff out, or is this really a hands-off part of the court?
I think the key there for you is that because it is important to know what the state requirements are, we talked with Scott, and he said, here are the minimums you need to have for a county courthouse facility. And so we passed this by him and said, have we met your needs that they're going to dictate? And that's why we've incorporated the minimums. If we wanted to come back with, say, a recommendation that gets rid of one, we'd have to go back to him and say, would you allow this according to the state rules? If he says no, then we have to stay with it.
I just want to bring the community to realize
That's a good question.
that component is a little bit different than the rest of the
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how many jury trials are there per year in this county? Have you looked at the utilization of these spaces? I don't know if there was one. I mean, are we building for something that's not really going to happen? Has there been a jury trial in this county? Was there one in 2012? Was there, how often is the district courtroom used? How often is the magistrate used? What kind of prisoners, how many prisoners are brought from the jail, and how many people come to magistrate court who are not incarcerated? Do you have any idea?
I think that is a valid question that you're asking, and we haven't gone through an intensive research of the past couple of years to see what you have used.
But that really isn't, that's not our responsibility. This is a facility that is being built for the state.
It's not being dictated by numbers of usage, it's being dictated by the fact that the state has a minimum.
It's a responsibility of the county, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the responsibility of the county to provide the state court a facility that they can do, a safe facility, and a functional facility that they can do business in.
And the state dictates that.
And the state,
And the county has to provide that.
if that's a question, we will follow up. The next time we will come in with some type of.
I made a note of it, we'll see what we can do.
Yep.
Is it possible to meet the minimums with the existing space?
We have, that's the next step. But I'll tell you that if there was an addition put on that building, or if we reconfigured the inside, it could easily be done. You can add an elevator. You can reorganize what's there. And if you have to put on an addition, you can do it in a very simple, a way that makes it blend with the existing building.
And
you can
isn't
make
that what renovation means?
I have one other thing, and I know that this isn't a popular thing amongst people that work in the courthouse. I was on the board for 24 years, but there was, this idea of reinventing county government. And I do remember that there was one county, and I can't remember if it was Sioux County or where, that they combined the auditor's and recorder's office. And, looking down the line, I've often thought, because all of the offices are interrelated, the way that things flow through there, that if the walls were knocked out, you could honestly have a business manager and have everybody, you wouldn't need all of these.
Those are exactly the ideas we're hoping to hear from everybody. I had a question in the
Yeah,
back.
Don, the idea isn't a question so much as it's just to give people a perspective of what we're talking about when they bring up 40,000 square feet. Or this building here, the library, and granted it's not exactly a square or a rectangle, but it's approximately 10,000 square feet. So when people bring up the fact, well, maybe we could put it all on one level. So take that and envision that setting over on the grounds where the courthouse is now and multiplying it times 2, 3, 4. That gives you an idea of what kind of size that you're talking about.
Well, first of all, I'll ask a simple question. If I told you that building is perfectly fine, how many people would agree with me? There are no problems in that building, and it's perfectly fine the way it is. We didn't see it that way either. We do have an index so you can flip right to some of these, but I'll give you a couple of the key headings of the things that we looked at. I mentioned accessibility and life safety. We also looked at means of egress. You're going to find that when you get up to the upper floor, you have a couple of corridors that don't meet code. They're too long. In case of a fire, people get trapped. You can't exit out onto the fire escape by going through intervening rooms. That's a code violation. That has to be fixed and addressed. So we looked at all those means of egress or paths out of the building. That's part of that life safety rule. We also looked at the exterior of the building. Is it falling apart? Is some of it in good shape? Well, we found a little of both. So to go back and fix that building, if you said, I'm just going to keep this building, I'm not going to add square footage, I just want to fix this, all of these things have to be addressed to the satisfaction of the codes. And we don't have solutions to these yet. That was not the task for this first phase. The task was to identify what the issues were. So I hope, if you don't like reading big reports, you might not want to read it, but I hope you at least take a look at it and see some of the things we found.
The next thing we want to do is talk about the public engagement aspect of this, and ideas on how to maximize that. With every project we do, there's a public input process. The advisory committee is a big part of that. But we want to engage as many people from the public as possible. And we've got folks who are going to make sure that we've got a video on YouTube, and photographs in different places. But we want to bring more people into our meetings, into the conversation. We've got a 2-day design workshop coming up. Many times we do radio spots the night before or that morning to remind people that, hey, you can stop by. But any ideas that you have that are specific to your county here that we should really consider getting the word out? Just looking for thoughts. Yes?
Well, I think one of the things that came up at the vote was simply that people wanted to know what the cost was going to be for each. I mean, there was nobody that ever, even though I have been accused of wanting to save the courthouse if it cost $100 million or whatever, that was never anybody's thought. We want to know what both will cost, And we had absolutely no idea of either one. I mean, you don't just draw things out of the air and say, well, it costs this much per square foot to build a building. Well, it depends on what kind of building you're building. A hospital costs more per square foot than it does to build an automotive garage or a school, or
If you want marble on the walls, instead of paint, it's going to cost more.
And I mean, that was what, I think was on a lot of people's mind. What indeed, if we could save the building, what would have to be done? What would it cost? And then what would,
there's actually a third component probably in there too. If you save the building and you still need to accommodate all this extra space, you would add on. So then there's that third vehicle.
The question on the table was, how do we get more people involved? Are there avenues within the county or the community that we should be using to get the word out? This process is about input.
You want that?
So
I don't know.
we want 100 people.
I don't know what you want.
We've held these meetings with hundreds of people in much larger communities because we're here to get your feedback and to have you get involved in the process, because the outcome of this is going to be better the more people are involved.
But as Kevin said early on, the advisory group is to take the feedback from all the other people that don't want to necessarily come to this meeting and provide that kind of core discussion for feedback.
I think you should do what we did and have a public meeting in the 4 major population centers, and everybody can come.
Sure.
Sounds like a good idea.
We had 100 sometimes, or 75.
we had over 100 at Osage, but.
But I think you're on the right track. We want to get the word out about what's going on and get the input back any way that we can, but in a manageable way. And I think you're correct, Jim, when you say you can't have 100 people and make decisions. But the 100 people can definitely provide feedback.
Yeah.
You guys are doing a great job tonight about asking us questions along the way and giving us more ideas about how we can get more feedback.
We have a fixed list of names that are the advisory committee. And that committee, as I said, is to give advice and make recommendations to the planning committee. All these meetings are open to the public, as we said all along. There will also be other public meetings in addition to these. If you can hear the input from those, great. We will be documenting as many comments as we can through those meetings. This meeting, as a kickoff, was more about us bringing each other up to speed on where things are at. There's a little bit of input that we were asking for, and that was, how should we go about getting the public more involved? And it sounds like you've been through this before, and we've got plenty of tools to do it. We've definitely been through this before, so I don't think that's gonna be a problem for us.
I have a question. As we find out the facts, how do we advise to the right people? Through voting, or how is that process carried on?
Well, the first contact, obviously, are the
We'll
supervisors.
get into that, we'll get into that real soon.
Okay.
Where the county spaces will go. So one option might be to renovate and add on to the existing courthouse.
Right.
Right? That's an obvious one. What we will be doing is identifying all the possible options, and then we're going to identify criteria that we're going to use to decide which of the options might be the best two for us to study when we do the design workshop. So the second obvious option is we
To
build
build
a
it-
courthouse
build a new one.
on a new site.
On new site?
Well, then you could have an existing site or new site. So under build anew,
Right.
there's two options under that.
New, build new on new site.
Or build anew on the existing site. And another option would be to continue renting. Now, I've heard this, wouldn't be my choice, but I've heard people say either where they are or somewhere else. I've heard people say, well, why don't they just rent?
So renovate and expand the existing, build new on a new site, build new on the existing site, continue renting. What else? Would it make
How about the
sense?
Washington
Well,
building?
Oh.
That on
Renovate
there.
another building.
Yeah, there you
Renovate
go.
another building.
Can I add a corollary to one of those, Kevin?
Sure.
You talk about, as an option, on a new site. Does that mean not in Osage?
The courthouse
I'm not
has the
sure.
most stringent requirements. And you could build just a courthouse, and there's a standalone courthouse, and then all the county facilities could go into another space, which is either new or remodeled.
Because I thought number one was renovate the courthouse and expand the existing courthouse as opposed to building
Renovate
it.
and expand that one building
Okay, then
to accommodate
build,
everything.
build a new building and renovate other county buildings.
The courts portion of the courthouse is the most stringent and challenging. If you're going to build a new building, that would be what you put
that's
in
what I
that
would
building.
recommend.
What we'll be doing as part of our next meeting is listening to any feedback that we may have gotten between now and then, but also identifying the criteria that we're going to use to determine which of these two options we want to study the closest. And then we're going to weight that criteria, meaning each of you will get to vote on your top two criteria. Sometimes we hand out dots and everybody goes and puts the dots on which ones they think are the two most important ones to them. Well, that becomes the weighting factor. One of these criteria for evaluating which sites we're going to study has 25 dots on it. That means you can get up to 25 points if that option scores really well on that criteria. If it doesn't score very well, it might only get 1. There might be another criteria that only got 5 dots. Well, it'll be the weighting factor. If you've met that one, you get 5 points. If you don't, you might get 1. And obviously here, our goal is to narrow this list down to 2. When we come back and do our design workshop, which is February 28th and March 1st, we'll have 5 architects there, 3 of us, plus 2 more, and we'll be looking at those 2 options. And we'll divide into groups, but we'll evaluate them on a lot of different levels. We're going to be working 2 full days, so we'll probably start about 9 in the morning on the 28th. And if I work till 6 or 7 at night the first day, we'll start again at 8 o'clock in the morning the next day and work until probably 5. And within those workshops, we will try to schedule public presentations. Those things are wide open. We allow people to come in, look over our shoulder at the beginning of the first day, and we'll bring the different department users in, and we'll get their feedback on the spaces and the arrangements. We'll probably do a presentation at noon. This is where we're at so far. What's everybody think? We may have 3 options of this scenario and 5 options of another one. And we'll ask people for their feedback on it. And then we hear what people like and what they don't like. We usually don't end up with one of those 3 to 5 different things. We usually take all the good stuff that we heard that people like and get rid of the stuff they don't like and try and create some new ones, and then we get hybrids of those. We'll work through the afternoon. We'll have another presentation at night. It might be 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. And then we'll probably do the same thing the next day. So we'll have kind of those fixed, little more formal presentations. The other time, people can just drop in, and we can take you through where we're at. We typically have building users and staff come in, and we might schedule those to work with different members of our design teams. The first morning, we answer those first questions. We may not even be talking about a building too much yet. We'll be evaluating sites that first morning, assuming it's this site or a different site or wherever those sites might be. So we spend the first day, and we'll probably have a floor plan by the end of the day or a variety of them, but we do a lot of the evaluation. And I'm skipping ahead a month and a week. On February 18th at 6 o'clock, it's on your agenda. It's on your agenda, you don't have to write it down. On the back side, there's a list that says review upcoming schedule. Option evaluation criteria with your committee on February 18th at 6 o'clock. That'll be held here. We're going to identify all that criteria, we're going to weight it, and we're going to evaluate each of these 6 options compared to your weighted criteria.
Yeah, one of the things that you guys are seeing is that we have brought you in on day 1. From the very beginning, you might be familiar with a process where somebody just comes to you and says, here's our idea, here's our footprint, here's our building, here's what it's going to cost, and then you get to react at that point. We're bringing you in the very beginning so that you can be part of that process.
Everybody sitting in this room, after a couple of these workshops, you're going to feel like you're part of the team, that you're part of the decision making, that you know you're making decisions based on good information. And I think hopefully there's consensus built in this room.
We all know that something's gonna have to happen, let's face it, you know, I mean, that's, yeah.
This group is going to make a recommendation
To the supervisor.
to the planning committee,
To them.
which is primarily populated by the supervisors, yes.
Who else is on it?
Lowell, you,
Brian McKinley.
Brian McKinley, and
Brian Jones.
Mark?
Joanna.
Joanna Anderson, Deanna Eastman, was that the group you're talking about?
Well, I don't think they were put on the plan.
And we got a
That's a
5,
different one.
Yeah.
we have a 5-member core planning committee.
I don't
So
have
3
it.
supervisors, plus the retired judge, and Mark Walk?
Yeah, I think it was Mark.
The county attorney?
Yeah.
Yes,
We just recommend to them, and they make the final decision.
yes.
So what do you see us doing, or what do you see happening between now and that February 18th date? Are you expecting us to see that other people have some input, right? And you aren't going to be back for that, or could you
What's
tell me
happening?
how you see that might happen?
February
Well,
18th
The
is.
next meeting between now and that February 18th,
Mhm.
obviously, what we're going to do on that 18th meeting is we're going to identify the criteria for how we're going to evaluate these 6 options. So I think it would be good for you to all be thinking about those criteria. The criteria may be things like, we want it as close to the jail as possible so we don't have to transport prisoners very far. And they may relate to our goals for success. It may be, we need a site that is visible and identifiable as the county courthouse site. I'm just throwing some things out there. So we're asking you to think about what's important for the location in the building as we consider these options. We want you to think about, are there any other possible options? If somebody said, maybe we renovate another building, and I heard the old school, maybe there's another building too. I don't know. maybe there's a specific different site that might make more sense.
So we're coming up with the criteria ourselves?
No,
Or what?
we'll come up with criteria.
We'll have some,
But
but
you
we
don't-
want you to come up with criteria as well.
Okay,
We'll have some, but this is your facility.
no, I know.
You'll have other criteria
Yeah.
as well.
It'd be nice to know what criteria
Well,
you might have,
we
I
may-
would like that.
We may have the criteria, but then you could be the judges of how you rank them.
Well, right, and it would be nice to be able to think about that ahead of time, maybe?
Okay.
Is that,
Here's an example, when it says renovate other county buildings, think about which buildings that might be, and maybe there aren't any.